Hello, and welcome to Insightful Conversations with your host, Three Principles practitioner, Adey-Jones. Join her each week as she welcomes some of the world's leading Three Principles teachers and practitioners who share how this understanding has dramatically improved the quality of their lives and the lives of those they work with.
I'm so thrilled to have as my guest the wonderful Cathy Casey. Cathy is a highly skilled and experienced trainer of the Three Principles understanding. Her work ranges from corporate consulting with blue-chip companies through to the public sector, such as health and hospital programs, government organizations, and juvenile and adult criminal justice systems. Cathy is especially known for pioneering the Three Principles to prison inmates in the California correctional system. Because of her experience of having a father who was a World War II veteran, her current vision is to bring the principles to all veterans of any war. Cathy is currently teaching veterans who are incarcerated. Hi, Cathy. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Oh, so I really am. I mean, you're such an inspiration. You have done so much work in an area that's often neglected and forgotten. I mean, it really is, lock the door and throw away the key. So I'm fascinated to know how you first brought the principles into the prison system.
Well, it was kind of interesting. Believe it or not, I've had several positions within the prison and jail systems. When I got out of college, I actually was a correctional officer in the state of Georgia, working with women, incarcerated women. And then when I came out to California and I went to graduate school, and I was looking for a job to kind of be part-time to, put me through graduate school. Well, I ended up doing a criminal justice program where we did data collection on what drugs were being used out on the street. So we would interview inmates that were newly arrested to find out, what drugs were they using. And it was while I was doing that project for the National Institute of Justice, and I had been learning the principles, and as I'm sitting there and I was, directing this program, and I'd bring in a team of interviewers. So I would be sitting waiting for the interviews to be completed. And I started to notice, especially on the women's side, how stressed out they were when they were doing phone calls to their family. They were freaking out, about what was going on out there. And it suddenly dawned on me, well, wait a minute, if this is helping me and it's helping my other clients, maybe it would be great to teach this in the jail. Oh. So that's how I started. My colleague and I, we just wrote up a program, submitted it for funding, and we got funded.
That's amazing. That's so great.
But that was the easy part. Then getting it into the system, the commander was all for it, but there were so many other programs, there was like no room for another class. And I was getting ready to kind of give up on it when it turned out they were starting this, what you would call kind of like a therapeutic boot camp within the jail. And they had a gap in their program that needed to be filled. And she pulled out my proposal and said, wow, this is like manna from heaven. This will be perfect. So I got the call, can you start tomorrow? Yeah. So that's how we started.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I know that, I've listened to you talk many times. I love it. You tell some incredible stories of transformation you've seen. You've been in some pretty extreme situations. And I'd tell us some of those stories.
You want me to tell some of the stories?
Yes, I do. I love the stories.
Oh, there's so many. Actually, I'm putting them, slowly writing them down, and I'm putting them all in a book so that because people love to hear the stories.
Exactly.
But the one story that comes to mind, which I just shared recently, and I hadn't shared it in years, in that lockdown unit that I was teaching the principles with. That means these are guys that have, done pretty serious crimes. If you notice in the pictures, if they're wearing a darker top, in color it's a red top, that means they've killed another person. So in that particular unit, this one guy, he came up to me on break. He said, Cathy, could you write a letter to the judge asking him to let me stay longer in the class? And I said, oh, okay. So I said, well, why do you need a note? And he said, well, once I get sentenced, they pull me out of here and I go to prison. And I don't want to miss the last 3 classes. And I said, well, sure. So I wrote him a note. And so he's before the judge for sentencing. Now, you have to understand, most guys, they can't wait to get sentenced because it gets them out of this main jail where they don't get to go out. Whereas if you go to a prison, you're out on the yard. You probably have a lot of friends in there already. Yeah. So being in this jail is pretty intense. So when he asked the judge, could he stay longer? The judge looked at him and the judge said to him, wow, that's unusual. And you look different. Why do you want to stay longer? Well, I'm taking this class and it's really helping me. And I don't want to miss the last 3 classes. And would it be possible? And so the judge said, listen, I don't have time to ask you about this right now. I'm going to give you the time to stay in the class. But when you come back for sentencing, I want to hear about what you're learning. Wow. So he finished the class. And then he, again, went for sentencing. And he started sharing with the judge what he had been learning about how thought worked and how, how we create our own experience. And, he's just sharing all this stuff with the judge. And the judge looked at him and he said, I see a big change in you. And he was up for 25 to life. He's in a gang, and anything you do gang affiliated. It was his 3rd strike. So that means 25 to life. And after the judge talked with him, the judge said, all right, here's the deal. I'm going to give you 15 to 25 years, and you will be eligible for parole in 10. Wow. He reduced his sentence. And so when the inmate came back and he, everybody's asked, how did it go with the judge? And when he shared his sentence, the other inmates, their mouths dropped. Wow. They said that they had never in a million years heard of that happening. So again, the judge saw a real change in this inmate because they're with them over the trial period. I mean, they see this inmate for a long period of time. Well, then off he goes off to prison. And then one day I teach a class on the outside, a community class in the evening. And this gentleman came up with an older Hispanic woman who did not speak English. And the gentleman said, this woman would like to say something to you. And I said, okay. And she starts welling up. She's tearing up and she's saying in Spanish, thank you for giving me my son back.
Oh, I'm going to well up here.
I looked at, and I looked at her. She said, thank you. I know I'm not going to see him a lot, but thank you. That's the son that I know that has been gone for many, many years. Thank you for giving him back to me. Wow. How cool is that?
That is so
I was
amazing.
Floored. I was floored. So that's, again, when you go in, you don't expect what's going to come up. But I can guarantee, we started calling them miracles. Just another miracle where somebody has a transformational insight that just goes beyond any expectation, so that even the judge could see the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even the judge could see the difference.
And you were telling me a story once about somebody that was basically chained up who said, can you share that again as well?
That's a special story. When I would go in to teach this class, there was one guy who used to come up to me and he'd say to me, I shouldn't be in here. I didn't do it. I shouldn't be in here. And, I didn't know what to do with that. But he every time he saw me, he would say that to me. Or he would mention it in the group discussions. And so one day I looked at him and I said, have you ever considered that the more you say that you didn't do something, that maybe people would start to think that you did do it? Because, kind of how thought works through you, the more attached you are to something, the further away you get from what you're trying to connect to or convey. And he looked at me, he said, dang, I didn't even consider that. I said, well, I hear what you're saying, but the fact that you're so attached to this, I think is really getting in the way of how you present, just your presence, your groundedness. So to make a long story short, after that, he really got into connection, and he started sharing this with other inmates when we were not having class. And when he was in the courtroom, people saw a big difference with him, and people were kind of, there was something about him. I was asked to testify at his trial, and he again was up for either life or the death penalty. And so and I said, well, I can't testify on your behalf. I'm not allowed to do that, but I can testify to what you and the other guys are learning. So the judge allowed me to be questioned, but also they allowed a video to be shown, not the one I shared with you, but another video about what they were learning. And he ended up getting life without parole. Young guy. He was going to college, for heaven's sakes. But he was part of this gang, the Crips, and because he was affiliated and he was with them when this crime happened, they're all lumped in. They all get the same charge. So to make a long story short, after he received his sentence, and I was there in the courtroom, and I was just a nervous wreck, you know, and he said to me even before the last time I saw him before he went up for sentencing, he said, you know what, Cathy, I'm good either way. Either outcome, I'm totally okay with it. And so after he received the life without parole, and this is a young guy, we're talking 24 years old. Yeah. So we get to interview him after. Usually they whisk them away, but I got access to him. So they put us in a holding room. He was chained to the wall. He was chained at his ankles and his wrists. And my camera guy was behind me, and I was facing him and just kind of interviewing him. And he started talking about psychological freedom while he's all chained up. And he says to me, he said, you know, Cathy, I'm probably more free than most people out walking on the street. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, he was speaking from a very deep place. Yeah. So again, unexpected. And it was filmed. Unfortunately, I can't get access to the film, but wow. And then they whisked him away in all the chains. And at that point in time, he became my teacher. Yeah. No, and he's doing very well. He completed school. He got his degree while he's locked up. He's not one infraction since he's been locked up. They put him in the gang area, which he didn't want to be in, but once you're affiliated, they separate you. Well, he finally got out of that. He was finally able to be in a different kind of prison where he could, live his life. Yeah. And he said he knew he could live his life. Yeah. And that's again, another amazing story.
That's so powerful. And I love, you were talking when you were at the Soul Center series with us about how this is helping break that generational, yes. that basically talk about that. I mean, some of these kids that grow up with parents in gangs, I think you mentioned, instead of going to college, yes. like your alma, well, I can't say that word, but way to get tongue-tied, but that they looked to go into prison. That was their future. They knew that. Yeah. And
because I also taught the principals in the juvenile justice system, and the older ones, as soon as they turn 18, they go to the adult prison. And some of them prided themselves on that. They're kind of like, oh, I'm going to go to the big house, so to speak. And well, when we were in that lockdown unit, there was an inmate there who was in for a very serious crime. And another rehab officer, and a few other people were trying to do an intervention with him to get him to agree to allow his son to take a different direction. Apparently the son was in the system also, but the son was wedded to, no, this is what my dad wants me to do. I'm going to stay affiliated with the gang. And, unless my dad says otherwise, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah. So they were trying to do this intervention with his father, and the father refused. He said, no, this is what I want for my son, and this is how it's going to be. And I'm like, oh, and I wasn't really involved in that. I heard about this from the rehab officer. So this particular inmate got sent to San Quentin, and that's where death row is in California. They just got rid of the death penalty about a couple of months ago. But up until then, apparently this inmate, he was there when they had an execution. And when they have an execution, there's this certain red lights go on in the prison. Like these red lights go on, they're everywhere. and everybody's in lockdown, and it's like the mood in the whole system is just really bad because they all know an inmate is getting executed. Well, I got a letter from this inmate through my office telling me, having gone through that experience, he decided to allow his son to be pulled out of the gang system. Wow. That changed him. He said, wow, I don't know why, but just experiencing that whole thing, I do not want that for my son. And so he allowed the rehab officers to intervene. Now, here's the deal. That's unheard of.
Yeah.
See, and I think because of how he was impacted with what he learned when he was here locally, and then obviously kind of waking up to his own wisdom and his own realization, like, why would I want this for my son?
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
Yeah.
So and the rehab officer said to me, we didn't think this was ever going to happen. They gave it a shot anyway, but they were totally amazed that the father agreed.
Miracles, as you say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's
there are way more where that came from.
I know, we could go on all day. I want you to talk a bit also about the guilt, because you're saying that people don't let themselves off the hook because of the guilt. And you say there's a difference between guilt and making amends, taking responsibility. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that this understanding helps those incarcerated with this.
Well, it's for all of us.
Yeah,
I think,
exactly.
I mean, it's more extreme with if you're an inmate and you're sitting in jail. See, people think they don't care and, they're ruthless and they don't have a conscience. And well, actually they do. Yeah. And it's interesting because I picked up on this heaviness, when I'd be with them at the beginning when I started working with them. I felt this kind of heaviness. And I'd ask questions like, well, what do you want for yourself? I mean, what if you had one wish? And most of them said peace of mind.
Yeah.
Peace of mind and family. Those were the most important things. So I said, well, what's getting in the way of peace of mind? And that's when it started to come out. Well, I did wrong, and there's nothing I can do to make up for it. And their idea was, I need to feel as bad as I can to show people that I really do know that I did wrong. But see, that backfired because they would feel so bad, and that would be such a heavy feeling that anybody who's in that wants to get out of that feeling. So we end up, using drugs to get away from that feeling.
Of course, yeah.
We end up being in familiar territory to just kind of buffer yourself because it's such a bad feeling. And especially when they're locked up, they're just sitting with themselves.
Yeah.
So I talked to them about, well, what's the difference between feeling guilt versus taking responsibility? And they looked at me, and I drew it on the whiteboard. I said, well, I drew the stick figure with a ton of thought. I said, now that's guilt. And then I drew a stick figure with just their wisdom, just a kind of a blue circle, and without all the extra thought. I said, now, if your mind is free and clear, what help will it be for you to have all this intense, heavy guilt feeling? How does that help your loved ones? How does that help you take responsibility? And they really saw it. They saw the difference. I said, now, yes, we definitely need to and that's a big deal, owning up. Yeah. You don't hear them owning up. The rehab officers and correctional officers, they said there's no way, they never own up to anything they've done. And when they saw the difference, I said, yeah, it's okay to take responsibility and do what you need to do to make up for it. Whether it's you're going to do time, you're going to make financial amends, psychological amends, whatever you can do to make that right. But walking around in a heavy state of mind is not going to make a difference. And that just opened them up enough where they could even start talking about this stuff. See, that's the thing that doesn't happen, is where they talk about their feelings, about how and so that was probably more of a problem for them, the heaviness and the guilt. than anything else. And that's why they keep reoffending.
Yeah.
I saw that as like really key. So that was a big deal. Because I didn't even really talk about that until I started to realize that for them.
Yeah.
But that's all of us.
No, absolutely. Well, it's the same exactly. The only difference is, I mean, somebody did an action that unfortunately there are consequences
Yes.
for, but quite a lot of us do actions that we don't get caught for, and we're outside. But that, again, I love about this understanding is that it's not you at your core that's damaged or bad. It's just, you did something that was, had consequences and was hurtful and to others and society, but it doesn't mean that they're bad at their core. I mean, what would you say is the most helpful in the understanding of the principles that these inmates grasp onto really fast and really quickly, and is the most impactful for them?
Well, I have a cute story with that. As you can imagine, probably their entire lives, but do you think anybody looks past their behavior or looks past their culture or, the gang thing? See, people are always looking at them in terms of how they're manifesting. Mm-hmm. They're not seeing that their inner core is still intact. Yeah. See, nobody sees that part of these folks. They see the other part. So for them, when I tell them, oh, my Siri is going off. Sorry, honey, okay. Go away. So in the early days, we talked about how they have this innate core of well-being and wisdom that has never been touched, that has never left them, has never been impacted, that even today, it's still intact. Mm-hmm. And that was a big deal for them. When they heard that from us, they were like, kind of skeptical. What do you mean? And we really got in there and helped them understand it, that there is this innate core that just gets buried with a ton of thought over the years, So it's like the sun behind the clouds. Yeah. The clouds are covering it, but the sun is still there. So we really drove that point home. And that thought is the only thing that keeps them from being connected to that. Even though it feels like it's not there, it really is there. That really went in. Yeah. It was so uplifting for them because nobody had ever seen them that way. Mm-hmm. So they had an art class after our class. And so their artwork, they did all their artwork, and the art teacher, she put it up all along the walls of this big, huge room. And in every art, and there are a lot of amazing artists with these guys. Yeah. There was a blue dot. So we call this inner core their blue dot. And we use that as a metaphor. We all have a blue dot. Mm-hmm. And nobody ever loses their blue dot. And, we really, really talked that one up a lot. So they put their blue dot in their artwork. Mm-hmm. Every art they had, their blue dot was in there somewhere. And so we come in the next week, and the correctional officer, she says to us, well, no, they're not coming out for class today. They're all in lockdown. They've been in lockdown for a week. I said, why? What happened? Well, they're doing gang stuff again. I said, well, what do you mean? What are they doing? Well, they're putting this blue thing in all their artwork. And that's the Norteño gang, their color is blue. Exactly. They thought it was a gang thing. Oh, no. And I looked at the officer, and I guess they were trying to explain it to the officer, and they weren't even listening. Oh my gosh. I said, sir, that's their blue dot. That's their innate wisdom. We use that as a metaphor. Mm-hmm. And the officer looked at us. He said, and you had to use blue? Couldn't you use pink or purple or yellow? You had to use blue. And I said, sir, you're absolutely right. I should have known better. And I'm totally apologizing to him. But I felt so bad. But you know what? Talk about a teachable moment. When the guys finally came back to class, I apologized to the class. And the guys go, Cathy, we knew better. We should have told you. They could have told us, Cathy, you don't want to use blue. Let's have a yellow dot instead. Yeah. I mean, but they sort of liked the blue, they were kind of, what's the word, undercover about it. Exactly. But the bottom line is to see them all embrace this idea that they still have their blue dot. That to me was the biggest thing that impacted them. And just like you said before, for all of us,
I mean, that's huge. That to me, I think is just huge for all of
Well,
us to remember.
I work with a lot of folks, successful people. They don't know they don't know that they still have a blue dot.
Oh God, I didn't even know I had one to begin with. Never mind, still
I,
have one.
I was always trying to get back to it. I thought, well, I must have had it when I was little, and so I spent my whole life just trying to get back to it until they said, no, it's been there the whole time. The joke has been on you, Cathy. And
Exactly.
I'm like, okay.
Well, I can't believe it. We've run out of time. I really
You're
wanted to
kidding
get.
me.
I know
Wow.
it goes so fast. I wanted you to talk about your work that's coming up with the veterans, but would you come back on again and talk about that?
Absolutely.
I would love to talk about that and the connection to your father and everything. That's another area that has been, unfortunately vastly neglected right now too. So
well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.